Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation on the IEP process and assessment. This will be the only time that we discuss special ed assessment other than next session when we talk about response to intervention. I want to start with a do now, although I won't be making you do a do now. But one of my goals in my live course, and I decided just recently to expose my online students to it as well, was to talk about some strategies that I would use if this were a live course, which means you will have a tendency to use them if you've been exposed to them. Now, a do now is a strategy that takes into account one of the most important and powerful times of a class, and that's the beginning minutes. Though, just like in a list, the beginning and the end of a class are the things the things that students remember the best. So, what usually happens during the first and ending minutes of a class is wasted time. Trust me, I know. I've observed many a high school class where the teacher sits at his desk, takes attendance for 5 to 10 minutes. At the end of the class, with about 5 to 10 minutes to go, he says, "That's all I have. Let's take out and start doing your homework," and that's it. So, doing a do now is something that takes advantage of those first minutes. So, I've also have a link here to a teaching channel video that talks about using a do now, and I'll be sharing with you in let me go into course materials. If you went to all materials and actually course materials in session 2, you'll see that I'm sharing a lot of teaching channel videos. If you haven't been exposed to the teaching channel, you should check it out ASAP, because they have a lot of good stuff that you need to check out and you need to check out and use and had trouble there finding the course. So I'll go here into coursework by week, and this is session 2, course materials, and you'll see that I have these videos here. Check it out, watch that video, and make it part of your practice. Okay, another strategy that I like to use is think, pair, share, and here you'll see that I've asked people to pair up, and because I believe that random questioning, whole group questioning, is a waste of time. One student answers and another student and all the 25, 28 other students sit and passively listen. So here's some things that I ask in my class, and I also have shared a link for a think, pair, share as well. I also have a video on a think, pair, share, but it is actually the way she does it, the way this teacher does it is good, but she does it with a large group of 5 students, and I wouldn't recommend that. If you're doing a think, pair, share, you want everyone involved. Now, more kids are involved in this, but typically in a group of 5, if it's not structured, the brighter kids are going to take over. And if you have pairs, think, pair, share, so the pair part, if you have pairs, then the other, and you do it correctly, the first, you give them a minute to think about the question, so that's the think part. Then you pair them up, and now 30 seconds the first person talks, then 30 more seconds the second person talks. And you'll notice in this video that the teacher has a whiteboard with a timer in it, which I think is fantastic. Okay, so So what are the big ideas of IDEA? This is where you should take out your vocabulary in your own words and start, every time I give a presentation, you should take out your vocabulary in your own words and start writing down the definitions. So when it comes to the end of the semester, you won't be overwhelmed. You'll have one of the assignments already completed. So take out your vocabulary in your own words. You'll find it in session 1, course materials, and it'll be elsewhere throughout the course as well. So the Individuals with Disability Act, IDEA as it's known as, began in 1975 as Public Law 94-142 and was amended in 1997 and again in 2004. When I worked in Massachusetts, in 1973 is when I started working in special ed, and that's when the state of Massachusetts came up with a law that the federal government mirrored. I can't remember what the name of the law was, but Massachusetts was using it first. It guarantees that every child has a free and appropriate education. You may see these initials throughout your special ed career: FAPE, free and appropriate public education, in the least restrictive environment, LRE. And we all know of the horror stories that we've heard about people that have been shut up, kids that have been shut up and locked away and forgotten about. And a lot of these laws came about because of those things. You also should click on this Part 200 regulations. These are New York State's regulations when it comes to all special ed regulations and processes and procedures, timelines, everything you need to know about special ed in New York State, you'll find in these Part 200 regulations. If they would just come up. And I think they will now. Okay. Failed to load. They're there. It was updated. This was updated in July 2013. And it's pretty long. As you can see, it's pretty detailed. And this is information. If you're going to teach special ed, especially in New York State, you should download this and keep it close. Somewhere where you can get to it. One of your readings this week is a document by Waterman, who is I believe a professor. She used to be a professor at SUNY Oswego, I believe, and she's written a great document. It's 20 years old, but it's still valid. The information in it is still valid, and that's why I still use it. And some of you will say, what's he using a document that's 20 years old for? But one of the big ideas of her article is the purpose of special ed assessment. So a lot of people will bash large-scale standardized tests, but the norm reference kind are the kind we use for these reasons right here: screening and identification. So screening, like pre-kindergarten screening or preschool screening, you need to have norm reference tests to see if students are functioning where they're supposed to be. Eligibility and diagnosis. So when we're assessing students to see if they have a disability, we need to have standardized tests that have been validated, that are reliable, and are norm reference, so we can tell if a student is where he's supposed to be or if he's falling behind. IEP development, of course, using it to create an ed plan, and instructional planning, which you as a teacher can use, and evaluation. This is a step that I find is often missing from the use of assessments in special education. Is it working? In other words, if we stick a kid into special ed, is he going to stay there for the rest of his life? Are we going to use evaluation to see if he's making progress, to see if he's catching up? And that's the difference nowadays, especially as you'll see next session with response to intervention, is that we used to not care if kids caught up. As long as they were in the resource room, we let them do their homework. We helped them with their homework. We had separate locations, so we helped them with tests, quote unquote. We weren't supposed to be doing that, but you know how that works when people give hints to kids that are taking tests. That's all changed now. I mean, we need everyone to master the standards, and in order for that to work, we need to get kids caught up. So the evaluation part, the progress monitoring part, is very important. Editing this part, as you can tell, I'm dressed differently. I have my Red Sox shirt on. They're currently 9 games in first place in the summer of 2018. You'll notice that in Salvia, that is the reading I have you do now rather than Waterman. Waterman is in ancillary materials, as I mentioned in a note. Salvia et al. Have 7 purposes of assessment. 3 of them are identical to what Waterman said: screening and identification, eligibility and placement, although Waterman had 2 different purposes for the special ed portion, and instructional planning and modification. Those are similar to Waterman's. And program evaluation is also similar to Waterman. That's the one that I mentioned that not many people are using large-scale assessments for that purpose. The next is progress monitoring, which we're going to talk a lot about next session when we do RTI, and accountability, which has become a dirty word in many educational circles, but it definitely is one of the purposes of why we use assessment nowadays. And then resource allocation, deciding who gets what they need, and using assessment to decide that. So that's the difference between Waterman and Salvia et al. So the first part is gathering information, and you'll see some various ways, and using multiple assessments is a big idea of this course. Unfortunately, that with the onset of No Child Left Behind in 2001, 2002, many people just used the large-scale tests to be the one way they improved their school and school district, and they started making decisions based on one test, the state assessment, whether kids got promoted, what schools they went to, etc., etc., and that's not good. You know, we need to use multiple ways to assess school, especially when we're talking about promotion. You know, if a kid bombs at the state assessment and has done well all year, you know, we can't keep that kid back. That's not right. Okay, pre-referral interventions, we'll talk about that much more next week, next session, when we talk about response to intervention. This used to be part of the whole process of referring a student. You had to do pre-referral interventions, but that never happened. This next term, when we talk about observations with 2 eyes, I have to change that. When we talk about observations, and a functional behavior assessment, FBA, is something that you may be exposed to or may be asked to do. Now, typically you need to be trained to do this. I'm going to interject here, edit this film, because I just wanted to mention the similarity between Waterman article, which I'm not requiring you to read, and the Salvia et al. Chapter. That those authors begin the chapter out with talking about multiple ways to assess a student, and they include record review, interviews, observations, which are non-systemic or systemic, and testing. So those are the 4 general areas that Salvia et al. Mention. And just to know that, again, to reiterate, a big idea of this course is that we shouldn't be making any educational decisions with only one assessment. We need to use multiple assessments before making any decisions that impact kids. That's it. And I have a little flyer here, because this is one of your vocabulary words. Functional behavior assessment is a process that incorporates a variety of techniques and strategies to diagnose the causes and to identify likely interventions intended to address problem behavior. It looks beyond the behavior to identify biological, social, affective, environmental factors that initiate, sustain, or end the targeting behavior. So not only is this is very, it's like an applied behavior analysis is an FBA on steroids. It's taken the function behavior assessment to a different level. But it really is looking at target behaviors that precede acting out, precede some kind of problem behavior that a student has. And it's also an ecological assessment, as mentioned in Waterman, and I'll go back and I'll get to that. Here's some more interviews and testing. Waterman talks about ecological assessment, which is assessing students in all realms of their school life, and even at home, to see exactly what may be causing behavior or instigating behavior or triggering it. Curriculum-based measurements we will talk about next. These are short-timed tests based on your curriculum that are sensitive to small gains in achievement and are used for progress monitoring. Dynamic assessment is actually using the teaching process to assess students. Task analysis is breaking things down to very small steps. And outcomes-based assessment is basing your assessment on what you want the student to be doing or be like when they're done. And the last one is learning styles, which doesn't get a lot of attention anymore, but should. If you go to learningstyles.net, and I think I have that up here. There it is. If you go to learningstyles.net, you have to register, but there's a ton of information on here. And I know in my 640 live courses, in my methods courses, when I taught live courses, I would do an informal learning styles assessment. So that's one thing that if you're really interested in, you can go to that website. You can go to that website and learn a little bit about what exactly are learning styles. The last part of this first video, I wanted to talk about the handout, difference of opinion. Actually, there are two companion handouts that go together that are required reading. I used to not make it required, but I really am going to make it part of the second week of this 2-week discussion board on assessment literacy. And it really is an important part of this session on special ed assessment because the article Difference of Opinion talks about or shares a vignette about a special ed teacher who, in my opinion, goes over the top advocating for one of her former students who was mainstream, which is the goal of all special ed, is to get kids back into the mainstream. So read that, and I'll be asking questions about it in the second week of our discussion board, along with what Lavoie says about how to advocate for kids and not get fired. And that's the big idea. I mean, I've worked with teachers who over advocate for students in a way that makes regular ed teachers, administrators, just want them to go away. So that's not what we want. We want our voice to be heard, and we want to be able to advocate for our kids in an appropriate manner, without getting people angry, without getting people to push us away, and without getting fired. So make sure you read those two articles and comment on them in the discussion board.